We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Friendly reminder to turn microphones on. You have two microphones.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Did I steal your pork?
Any changes to the agenda?
Revised agenda, adding item B under general business, which was to authorize the expenditure and identify funding source for the Ninja Anywhere Fire Rescue Days 2024.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. Any motions regarding the agenda
Motion to adopt the agenda
as amended?
as amended.
Motion by Amanda,
Second.
second by Gina. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Agenda is adopted. We have a presentation this evening. Welcome.
Yes. That's good.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm Andy Volmuth. I'm the new superintendent of the New Prague area schools. Excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And I will take just a few minutes tonight to talk. Really, it's the state of the school, but I'm really here to talk about the referendum that we are in the midst of. And so I'm going to share my screen, and it is a much longer presentation. I understand you have a busy night, so I'm not going to take the whole time. But I'd be happy to answer questions later on if people have them. We also are taking questions on our school district website. There are several web pages dedicated to the referendum, and so there's a link where people can share their thoughts and share questions, and we do our best to get back to them as quickly as possible. So give me 1 second as I do this. I feel a little rusty with my Zoom skills, and I think that's probably a good thing that I haven't used it for some time. Like I said, a lot of information available on our school district website, and thank you again for having me. This presentation is intended to be probably 30 to 45 minutes, and so I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'm open to questions at the end, as well as if you'd like to email me, call, or submit questions to the website. So we have been very, very busy since I took over on July 1st from Mr. Dipburner. I actually just was talking to Mr. Dipburner on the phone. He sends his regards. And one of the things that we know that last year there was a failed referendum for the New Prague area schools. We'll talk a little bit about that. And that resulted in about $3.1 million in reductions in the spring of last year. And so we're here today asking voters again, or we have been throughout the fall. And so this presentation is really a product of our information campaign. As you'll see, we have a kind of a two-pronged approach. One is to share as much information within the community as possible. We think that we have a pretty strong story, and so I, working with the administrative team, principals, have been doing our best to share information throughout the communities to make sure that everyone is able to make an informed decision. A little bit different than maybe has been done in the past, but not only do we see, you can see on the left-hand side, we have an information campaign. We have a very strong advocacy group, a citizens advocacy group that is meeting on a regular basis to not only share information, but push out a yes vote. And that is led by three, they don't like to be referred to as leaders, but it's led by three parents, Betsy Bond, Jean Schmidt, and John Deutsch, as well as school staff, as well as parent volunteers, and that they meet outside of the duty day. And so not only are they sharing information, but yes, they're also encouraging people to get out and vote yes. So our campaign is the Proud Tradition and Promising Future campaign. When I was interviewing for the job last winter, I talked about how they have to coexist. We know that there's a proud tradition in the New Prague area schools. It's my job, one of my jobs, to ensure that there's a promising future for current students as well as students that are yet to come. And so because of three factors, unfortunately funding hasn't kept up. State and federal funding has not kept up with the rate of inflation. funded and partially funded mandates and the rising cost of 21st century students, it's New Prague's turn to ask voters for an increase in order to help continue to maintain the programming that we have. And as someone who's coming from a different district and has a different perspective, those three buckets, if you will, not funding that hasn't kept pace with inflation, one, funded and partially funded mandates, and rising cost of educating students in the 21st century. Those aren't unique to New Prague. My previous experience was in Bloomington. I spent 16 years as a principal in Bloomington, and we had these same discussions in 2017 when we went to voters for an increase as well. So this is not unique to New Prague. It's a function of funding, unfortunately, and it's a function, and so it's our turn to ask voters for that increased contribution. Here are the details. The election is on Tuesday the 7th. We're asking for $450 per pupil for 10 years. And that would infuse about $2 million into our operating budget per year, which we think is a fair and reasonable number as I speak on behalf of the school board. And there's a lot of detail on the website, but because we believe that $350 is a fair average home value, if you think of all of the communities that we represent, we use that number. And it would be an impact of about $19.29 a month if your home was valued at $350,000, excuse me for that. And again, you can go to the website and plug in what your home would be valued at and find even more detail. Important to note, and I want to make sure I mention this now, unlike last year's request or part of last year's request, for those who are involved in agriculture or have land, part of last year's request would have taxed all of the acreage. People who have land, who have agricultural land, would only be taxed on, with this year's request, house, garage, and 1 acre. So not all the acreage is taxed. The school board, as I speak on behalf of them, thought it was very, very important to keep that number low, and they felt that $450, which equated to $19.29, was a fair and reasonable ask of their friends, their neighbors, all those different people, those constituents in which they represent. We talked about these buckets as to why. Why are we here? Why am I first several months on the job asking the New Prague voters for a tax increase? Not necessarily what I was designing to do, but it's allowed me to make some really good connections. Those factors are there. When we've talked about that. This is a maintenance request. People say, what are you going to use this money for? And when school districts go to voters, they really have two different kind of plan of a tax. One can be a maintenance request and one can be value add. Value add, you would be adding a building. You would be planning to add more staff. This is a maintenance request, and so the next 4 slides, which I'll go through fairly quickly, help define what maintenance means for us. So we want to maintain small class sizes. We believe that's really important. In fact, one of the first things I did when I came on the job was commissioned a survey to ask the community how they felt about their schools, what they felt was important, and that has really informed our campaign. So class sizes, we want to maintain small class sizes. 96 or 97% of our families believe that we are doing a good job with the use of technology to engage our students. That's great. We want to continue to maintain that level of engagement. And so we know that technology doesn't replace good instruction, but it can enhance good instruction. And so we want to be able to maintain what we have and at times add to what we have. It's really important for the citizens of New Prague and the surrounding communities to think about not only academic, but also social emotional supports, thinking about the whole learner and what that means. And for someone who's coming from a different district, I'm quite honestly very surprised and pleased to see the level of support that we are able to offer our students, both academic supports, which we oftentimes refer to as intervention supports, but also social emotional supports. We know that if students don't feel safe, they don't feel secure, they're less likely to come to school and they're less likely to learn. And so we need to do those things. And we have a lot of those things, and we want to be able to maintain those for current and future students, as well as avoid future budget reductions. Each of these slides go into more detail about that, but because my time is limited, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. To get to the last piece really kind of gives an overview of where we've been. I say this when I'm giving a presentation. This is about 15 to 20 years of school finance history in the New Prague area schools, and I'm going to try to do it thoroughly in 5 minutes. So, and I'll stop and pause after this. We do have a current operating referendum. It's for $246.70. If your house is valued at at $350, again, that's that metric that we're using, your tax impact is about $11 a month, and that brings in $1 million into our operating referendum, our operating revenue, okay? I should say this because I'm gonna go quickly, and there's a lot of information here. I think of this chronologically, and I encourage people to think of A, B, and C. This is A. We have a current operating referendum. B was last year's request. As you can see on the screen, there were 2 questions. One was a technology-related question. One was to replace and revoke our referendum. $1.5 million and $1.6 million, they would have had an impact of $34 for a home valued at $350,000. And we know that voters rejected both of those, thus resulting in the district to make $3.1 million in reductions last spring. That's B, okay? A with an asterisk, at the end of the last legislative session, there were lots of things that came out of the last legislative session, but one of the things that came out is they said to school districts, for the first time ever, you can approve an operating referendum under the same terms that you've done before by taking what we call a waiver. You have to have a public meeting, you have to announce it, you have to have public comment, and I think chronologically, if you remember, the legislative session ended on June 1st, and they had to make a decision in New Prague, and I say they because I wasn't here. I think Mr. Dittburner and the school board made a wise decision. They had to decide by June 15th if they were going to take that waiver, and they did. So that referendum continues on for 6 years. It had to be the same terms, the same number and the same dollar figure and the same number of years. So that's an asterisk to A. Make sense? And then it brings us to C, if you will, which is this year's request. It is, there we go. It is in addition to the money that is there, so it is stacked upon the $246.70, and the impact would be in addition to the $11 impact that already exists that carries on through referendum A. So one of the things that we know is that this is a significantly less request than last year's. Instead of a $34 impact, it's a $19 impact because the voters rejected it. The school board, we heard that that was too much. So this request is scaled back considerably because of that. But we also know that we need an infusion of revenue in order to be able to maintain the programs that we have, that our community expects from us, and that we believe our students deserve, A, B, and C. The last slide is this. There are 328, I have more, but I know my time is coming to an end, at least in terms of this presentation. There are 328 school districts in the state of Minnesota, and the highest ranked school receives over $22,000 per pupil, state and local funds. The lowest school district in the state, 328th out of 328th, receives a little over $10,000 per pupil funds. The New Prague area schools receives a little shy of $11,000 per pupil. So the local contribution, the state and local contribution that New Prague has received is in the bottom 4% when you compare where we are to those other 328 school districts within the state. That's one of the reasons why we are here today. It's one of the reasons why we think this is a fair and reasonable request, and it's important for us to be able to have this additional funding to stabilize programming, to maintain programming, like we said, for current and future New Prague area school students. That's 15 minutes on the dot. I'm available for any questions that anyone has at this point. And again, there's more to this presentation. I know I I have comparison slides and all of that, but I know you have a busy evening as well, so, questions?
Is the full presentation online?
It is not, it is not yet. There's going to be a version of the presentation online, including a voiceover in the next day or two. So you can go to the New Prague Area Schools website. The web pages are there. And if you would like, you could see the whole thing.
Just curious, why does New Prague rank so low on the funding per pupil?
Well, I lied, so I'll just do this real quick. If you go to operating referendum, here's your answer. These slides, the last slides that I went over, compare New Prague to size and scale of different districts. So these are our neighboring communities. Other districts have asked their voters for a tax increase to help fund their schools, as you can see here. Whether it be Jordan has not, so they do not have an operating referendum. Prior Lake, Shakopee, Lakeville, Northfield. You can see the local average, you can see the statewide average. And if you want to go to size and scale comparison, this New Prague Area Schools is about a 4,000 pupil student, about 4,500 closer to if you include early childhood. But when you look at where we are at in terms of the local contribution compared to districts of the same size and scale, about 4,000 students. So the answer is we've been able to get some really good results. To have our expenses, which is in this presentation, much lower than comparable districts, and haven't had to make budget reductions. The last year's budget reductions of $3.1 million was the first time New Prague has made budget reductions in 13 years. And for somebody who's from the outside, knowing what I just quickly went through you all with, that's kind of amazing. That's kind of amazing. It shows that they have been fiscally responsible. It shows that they have been good stewards of taxpayer money, but unfortunately, now we're here to ask for a tax increase, which we understand is difficult to do, but we believe is necessary and important.
If this doesn't pass, is it budget cut time?
Yeah, we don't talk about budget reductions in this presentation because we don't want to feel like we're threatening people, but we would have to go into budget reduction mode again at some point. Part of that depends on enrollment and enrollment trends, and so October 1st, we'll have a report to the school board in November about enrollment, but yeah, I can't tell you there's not going to be reductions in the future. In fact, there would need to be reductions in the future. There's two ways to get out of the budget reduction cycle when you're there. It's to infuse more revenue, it's to cut cost, and we've cut much of the cost that we have, and the other thing is to add more students. Right? And so we can't make the students appear just yet, right? We hope that to happen as the enrollment continues to uptick. But right now we need this extra contribution from our taxpayers.
Does anyone else have questions?
No, no questions. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll open up for public comment. Anyone here care to speak under public comment tonight about anything not on the agenda? Nothing? Okay.
Oh, that's what that is?
Yeah.
Commented on that.
Come on up. Please come on up to the podium and state your name and address.
Mike Newman, live down in Windrose.
Oh,
And I was made aware of an ordinance on Monday morning, and I don't know, a lot of you, I'm sure, aren't aware of it, except for you. Okay, but it's I get the need for the ordinance, but I think some of the numbers that were put in place for it were just kind of thrown out there. There's an ordinance that says you cannot use ATV, or not an ATV, but like say a side-by-side on city streets between the hours of 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. And I don't know about you, but I start my day very early. And I like to get stuff done. I'm up at 4:30 every morning. And I mean, I've been driving the streets with my side-by-side for, I don't know, well, ever since I've had it, because I drive that instead of driving my truck around because it's cheaper on gas. But I just feel like that, you know, I get the need for it because, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't want people ripping around on them things either after they leave the bars and stuff like that. But the morning time at 6 a.m., that's pretty late. In the morning, in the summertime, it's light here at 4:45. All right, even now, coming up next week, after we have daylight savings, it's gonna be light here about 5:45. And I don't know, I just like to have something out there to get that number changed, maybe to 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Because you have hunting season right now, and I know I use it every day for that. I use it every morning to go work out, and anything I have to do in town, I use my side-by-side. And like I say, I do a lot of my stuff before 6 o'clock in the morning. And I'm not doing it at 3 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning, but, you know, a lot of times 4:30, 5 o'clock, I'm out on the road moving around. And just like, bring that forward and see if you guys can do something about that 6 o'clock.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Did you guys know we had that? He did.
Yeah. I told you exactly 6, but
Yeah. Well, I thought it was funny, because, you know, I've been driving it every morning, and I'll see a police officer 3 days a week.
yeah.
And all of a sudden Monday, he pulls me over, I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And he's
Right.
like, there's an ordinance. I'm like, come on. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Council, is this something you guys want to tackle on a future agenda?
I think so.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
All right. Can we take a look at this ordinance again on a future agenda then?
Yep, we'll start with it as a report item, just providing the background on the ordinance, the rationale for the terms of the ordinance, what else aside from UTVs is included in the ordinance, et cetera.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else here for public comment? If not, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. We'll move on to consent. Does anyone have any items on the consent agenda they'd like pulled? Anyone want to make a motion?
Motion to approve consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by Amanda, second by Gina. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Consent agenda passes. We have a public hearing to continue. I always forget, do I need a motion to open a public hearing?
No,
I
you
wonder
just
if
open it.
that shouldn't be held off till, we typically advertise those for like 7:15. The person may arrive thinking it's later, so if we open and close it, I don't see anybody here.
So if it's posted at 7:15, we can't open it a minute earlier. We have to wait till 7:15, even if the rest of the business agenda is done.
It is posted for 7:15.
I don't know. The
Okay.
first one certainly was. I think the other one just was
So-
continued, so.
So we didn't state a specific time, we just said
I
continue
can
to a
look up the
specific.
notice.
I would look up the mailed notice to see if it provides a specific time, Andrea, if we didn't. If the motion to continue from future meetings was just to the next meeting. You could do it any time. Okay, so we just need to double check that.
Okay. Who's double checking that?
Me,
Okay. Just want to make sure we weren't all just looking at each other.
I'm just reading the,
Yeah, I'm reading Josh's notes real quick.
before we travel on.
There's no pressure like a quiet room.
Right.
Maybe while Rich is looking that up, I don't think there's gonna be a presentation on that unless it's specifically requested by the council, and you guys have seen it a couple times. Leah and Michael could get set up for their item, which is the next one on the agenda.
7:15.
It does say that in the notice? Okay. So we'll set that aside for now. Go to general business. This is a hot item, so welcome.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Nice to see you again. Thanks for having us here tonight. So we're excited to be here tonight to go through the results and findings and recommendations that came out of the a limited scope position classification and compensation study for the city. So again, it's nice to see you all again. Again, I'm Leah Davis. I'm a partner at Abdo, and worked on the project very closely with Michael Mooney here from our team. Worked very closely with your city staff, both Tom, Kelly, and even had an opportunity to meet with all the employees earlier this week. Gosh, was it this week? End of last week? It's blurring together, but have had a chance to talk with your employees too and get feedback and really make sure they're kind of aware of the study and what went into it. So today we'll kind of give you just an overview. We want to talk a little bit about, before we get into the results, just sort of that underlying assumptions, methodology used in the study. We'll get into the process and then really talk more about some of the findings and recommendations that you'll be able to consider as you move forward. All right. So again, as an overview, the City of Elko New Market has done a good job of maintaining your existing compensation structure. There's a lot of times we begin working with cities and it may be 10, 12 years before they've really done much to their step and grade tables or even done a formal market study. But that's something you've been in a habit of doing well and maintaining. Your positions are scored, job descriptions are still current. So those were things we didn't have to spend too much time doing. There were 2 positions in the city that had some significant changes to duties, responsibilities. And so we did help with updates to those job descriptions, and using your existing scoring methodology, we helped with some updated independent scoring for those. But otherwise, we really focused our time and energy on that market study, looking at both compensation as well as benefits, and we're working on finalizing data back on premium pay, specialty pay types of things like call-out pay and those types of things. Of course, we're always looking at making sure that when we get that data, we're providing you, decision makers, with what are the costs, the detailed analysis of what does that look like if you choose to adopt or implement. We're always testing any recommendations we would make to make sure they'd be compliant with Minnesota pay equity, so that was definitely a component of the study. And then again, spending a lot of time just making sure that leadership and decision makers and even employees have kind of an understanding that that communication and involvement and transparency was happening throughout the project. So that was done as well. All right. Under key project assumptions.
Yeah, so just kind of recapping, we met with the city leadership early on this project, and that's always one of our main objectives at the start, is to make sure we're designing a plan that works for the city. We like to customize our approach to make sure that whatever we're designing is in line with the expectations and the goals of the city. We know there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all. A lot of common trends, of course, in this space, but there are a lot of opportunities to design a plan that works best for the city. So this page, I apologize, there's a lot of content on here, but just to kind of recap, this is what we've picked up on when we met with the city leadership at the start of the project. Obviously, as you all know, it's a very competitive job market right now, and that was one of the main drivers of going through an exercise like this to make sure that the wages are competitive with the marketplace. The city also expressed an interest to maintain as close to the existing structure of the compensation plan design components as possible. We didn't want to come here and change everything into a new step and grade table, go change the number of steps. It should feel familiar to the employees if you do choose to adopt. We also wanted to make sure that we were capturing benefits data. The city knows that it's not just about the base pay, but we want to look at things like time off, holidays, and insurance offerings throughout. So we'll kind of get to that towards the end of the study as well. We also learned when we came to meet with the council a few months ago that where do you want to be positioned with the marketplace? That was a big topic of that discussion. We heard that you wanted to be above the 50th, but not at the top. So today we're going to present to you 3 different options, and those are outlined there on the screen here, where we have option 1. You'll see that throughout the presentation here. That reflects the 53rd percentile, and you can see it's 0.03% below the market. So we would consider that at market average. And then we also have an option for the 60th percentile, which is just about a 1.5% above the market minimums and maximums, and then a 70th percentile option as well, which is about 4.5% above market minimum and maximums. So again, we'll kind of go through those, but make sure, or one point that we wanted to make sure you know too, is that these aren't your only 3 options here. We wanted to kind of provide you those as a spectrum of where you could land within the market. We fully understand that there may be a discussion that leads you to be, for example, the 57th percentile, and we can support the city if that's where you choose to want to land. All right, so this slide is a little bit of a recap from the last time we were here presenting to council, but just again, as a refresher, we did utilize, ABDO sent out an individual survey to all of the cities that were identified. And then the League of Minnesota 2023 survey did become available right at the tail end of our project, so we had 2 cities that didn't respond to our direct surveys. So we were able to pull in the league data for those 2 that did not respond. When we have a market survey, whether it's an independent survey that we're sending out to the city or the league itself providing that data to us, it's important to note that we don't see job description by job description, right? We're comparing primarily job titles and organizational structures that we're getting from survey respondents. So when we're comparing a maintenance worker at Elko New Market, it might not be that exact title and exact job description at another city, but we're doing the best that we can with the information that we have and the knowledge that we have working through these studies. Another thing to note is that we're looking at the average minimum and maximum pay for every respondent. A lot of surveys focus on the midpoint. We like to focus on the minimum and maximum. That aligns with the League of Minnesota City surveys as well. And then we kind of let the midpoint fall anywhere between those two data points that we're collecting. I should have mentioned at the start, but cut me off, ask questions if you have anything that you want me to explain further or go back to it along the way here. All right, so this is just a quick view of the proposed scores. And as Leah mentioned earlier, we only did rescore 2 positions within the city. Those ones on your screen here are the maintenance worker, which was formerly maintenance worker 1 and 2. That position was merged into just 1 maintenance worker. And then you'll see the finance specialist listed here. That was formerly the accountant position. All other positions maintained the existing score. When we repointed those, that was a collaborative effort with city leadership and our team. And again, we're using that SAFES method that the city has historically used. All right, so this is a list of all of the cities that we solicited market data from. I understand that this list was agreed on in advance prior to starting the project, but I'll leave this up here because I know that there's a couple new cities. So, and Leah, Tom, if you had anything to add on how these cities were developed.
Yeah, the city has, and I'm sure the council's well aware of this, you've had an existing list which you've historically polled when you were doing your updates. And this year, in advance, it was sort of agreed to pull in more of those South Metro cities that maybe hadn't been included in the past because you really saw them as direct competitors for talent, right? So this list is different than the list that you've included in that you've typically surveyed, but it does still include a lot of your, really clear comparables when you're thinking about population, city proximity to the metro, those types of things. You've still got a lot of your real clear comparables, but you're also taking into account cities that might not be quite the same in terms of structure and size as Elko New Market, but that you do really see and have felt in the past are a competition in terms of talent. So those are included in the study, worth mentioning.
All right, so now we're going to get into our summary findings and proposed compensation plan. And again, ask questions along the way if you have them. We're going to go through kind of a lot of data here, and there's more detail in the report that was provided as well. So the first table here is showing by position at the city how the average minimum market pay compared to the city's minimum and maximum at the same time. So the first white column that you're seeing there is a comparison of the city's minimum to the market minimum. So a negative number indicates the city's minimum salary is that percentage less than the average minimum market pay for each position. Same thing on the maximum side. As you go through the list there, one thing to point out, on average, the city was 8% behind the market on the minimum side and 10% behind the market on the maximum side. We do address that difference of 8 and 10% further in the market, or further in the study here, so I'll circle back to that. But I would just call out that individual positions do vary greatly in here, but on average, we're looking at 8 and 10% below market.
I have one quick question for you. How many cities on the list previous are comparable to our population? Because I do know like Apple Valley and Lakeville are significantly bigger.
I think if we go back, and again, full disclosure, this list was provided to us in advance, so we weren't involved in the selection. But I mean, if you're looking at cities like Belle Plaine, Chisago City, Corcoran, Dayton, Jordan, New Prague, Lonsdale, yeah.
Salem Bayport are actually smaller than us.
Yep.
Thank you.
So it is kind of a smattering of bigger, smaller. Yep.
Yeah, good question.
Thank you.
Any question, this data can be kind of confusing, and I mean, wherever we go, it's kind of it can be sort of a point of clarification that can be helpful, so any questions on the data or the findings? Okay.
All right, so once we found all the market data, we went into, okay, what does that mean? How are we going to design or redraw grade lines, work with the plan to align the market data with the goals of the city? So on the report that was provided in Table 4, we actually had the full step and grade table for you, but to recap its structure, it maintains 8 total steps, including the start step, and 20 grade levels. We included the same 7% grade to grade adjustment, meaning if I'm at step 1, grade 1, step 1, grade 2 is 7% greater. That's the same as the plan is today. The one change that we did make is instead of a 3% increase from step 1 to step 2 and so on, we're proposing a 3.25% step increase. And that is largely due to the market data that we're seeing in terms of how long is it going to take to get from the minimum market data to the maximum market data. And you saw that where you're 8% behind market at the minimum and 10% behind at the maximum. That told us that you need a bigger step increase in order to get to the market position at both minimum and maximum. And then the range spread for each grade was static across all grades at 25.09%. So again, the goal was to try to maintain as much of that structure as the plan has today while aligning it with the market. Okay, so here's where we get into our 3 different options. Option 1, again, remember we're talking about the 53rd percentile there. Our goal is then to align that as close to market as possible. That's the 50th or 53rd percentile ended up being. With our proposed plan, on the minimum side, that ended up being 0.13% below market and on the minimums, and 0.21% below market on the maximums. Option 2, again, we're targeting the 60th percentile. That landed at 1.54%. Above market averages on the minimums, and on the maximums, we're looking at 1.46 above market maximum. And option 3, the trend continues there at the 70th percentile. That represents about a 4.3% position above market averages on the minimum and maximum. So I know that's a lot of percentages thrown at you. So we think this next slide will kind of help visualize what that really means. So again, those options and the percentages are the same up on top that we saw on the last screen. But what we're really trying to provide to you is a visual of where you're going to be positioned within the marketplace at any one of these options. So we're really looking at the differences of percentiles and percent above as a function of an average. Think of the 50th percentile, that's your median. And then when we say you're 0.13% above, that's comparing the average market rate to the minimum rate at the city. So there's a 0.13% decrease in that case from your pay to the market average, whereas the percentiles are more of your overall position. And so we wouldn't expect it to be 1% above average does not equate to 1 percentile up. It's a little bit skewed there, so we wanted to provide this as a visual. I feel like I threw 1,000 numbers at you. Any questions on any of that, or is that tracking so far?
We're with you.
Great. All right.
All right. So with all that in mind, and again, Michael, I mean, the options that we've provided, again, I'll say again, are just to provide you with a spectrum, right? So those are not the only 3 options. But whatever, if the council does decide to adopt an option or, a plan, what does implementation look like? I think that's always one of the big questions. So in this plan, we're really recommending 4 phases of adoption, and this is pretty consistent in any adoption of an updated step and grade. So phase 1 is really just focused on realigning the scale with the market, right? So you have a step and grade scale that we're recommending you retain, but we need to move the scale up to align your mins and maxes and everything in between with the market. So that's so adoption of that takes every individual person in their role. It puts them in the grade that aligns with the market, and they're going to move to the step that's closest to their current rate of pay without going backwards. So everyone gets an increase to move to a respective step in that new table. But it could be different. One person might get 5 cents because they're that close to the next closest step. One person might get $1 or more. It just really depends on sort of where they're at today versus where that table lands. So that is phase one, just getting them on the scale and getting the scale aligned with market. Phase two is getting the individuals realigned with their tenured position on your scale. So because your scale is going to make a pretty drastic move to catch up with the market data, it's 8% at the minimum, 10% at the maximum. There are definitely instances where an employee may have been currently placed on a step 6, for example, but the next closest step on the new table might be a step 4 or 3. It just kind of depends, right? So they've sort of slid back in their step placement or range placement, right, based on tenure. So phase two would move the employee back to their original step. So if they were on step 6 because of 6 years of service, it places them back to step 6. So that's that sort of range position, employee position adjustment.
So Lee, in short, step one is to move the pay schedule to the market. Step two is to move the employees to the market based on their comparable years of experience.
Correct. Yep. Phase three, then, so you get everybody on the table, you get everybody moved back to their respective step. Phase three applies the COLA that historically you've awarded every year, and that every city in your comparable group is likely adopting for 2024. So that would be something that you'd want to do just to make sure you keep up with the market as you roll into 2024, because all of our data is 2023. So presumably the cities in the comparable list are adopting something.
And
Actually, we
did-
surveyed that.
That was part of our survey. We asked for what their 2024 COLAs were, and we used the average of those respondents to propose a 3.4% COLA increase for 2024, and that's reflected on the charts that you'll see up next.
Yep. And then the final cost, which again, this isn't a new cost, you're incurring these costs every year because employees are moving steps every year based on length of service in your current plan, but it's just important to know these would be phase 4 represents the cost of those anniversary steps if they're not already at the top step.
And the costs that we'll have are prorated to the month of their anniversary date.
So, all right, so what we've got on these next few slides then are just the costs of implementation at the different option levels, right? So option 1, again, was the at the market data. So you can see for each of the adoption phases what that respective cost is, both individually and in total compared to your estimated payroll. So option 1 represents about a 14.6% increase in annual payroll costs in 2024. Presumably, and then again, this is annualized, right? So assuming a full year of adoption, if you adopted everything on January 1st, which you don't have to do that, but just for sake of representing the data. Option 2, again, that places you at the 60th percentile, slightly above market average, is a 16.5 increase in annual payroll costs. It is worth noting too, I will just double back. Phase 3 and phase 4 are expenses you would likely have incurred anyway, right? So when you're looking at that sort of add-on, it's really just phase 1 and 2. Phase 3 and 4, are happening every year sort of anyway. And then option 3 is the would represent an increase of 19.7% compared to the 2023 payroll costs. All right, any questions before we dig into just some of the preliminary benefit findings that we?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right, so one of the other things that the city was interested in learning more about was time off benefits for employees, particularly based on years of service. And so what you can see here, and this is a little bit, it's worth mentioning. So of the respondents, we had kind of a split between those that offered the sort of single bucket PTO model, which the city of Elko New Market uses, versus the annual sick and vacation, having the 2 bucket system. What was interesting is in your prior group of comparables, it was predominantly paid time off. So that was the norm. In the new group, we did see more of those respondents offering the 2 bucket system. I will say my inclination or my instinct is that a lot of that is just because some of those larger cities have very well-established entrenched union contracts that call for that two-bucket system, and they're just not probably ever going to unwind that. But I think in more smaller organizations, PTO, that single bucket model is definitely common. So there's nothing wrong with either model.
2 of the respondents actually said we offer PTO for non-represented and sick and safe for the union staff. So it was a little bit of a mixed bag.
Yep. But it's worth sort of representing them separately because PTO is more easily accessible to employees. A lot of times they'll have the sick bank, but you have to meet these certain criteria to access those hours. So we did represent them separately. But overall, what the data predominantly reflects is that you're fairly competitive in the first maybe 10 years in terms of the market and hours accrued each year. But there does seem to be a little bit of a lag as you get into those 10 to 20 years. So there may be an opportunity there.
It's also worth noting that we did not evaluate things like how much PTO you can carry over year to year, when that accrual is happening, whether it's where you get it right at the start versus it's a bi-weekly accrual or monthly accrual or anything like that. So we're looking at just accrual rates by 10-year band here. So there are other factors that we weren't able to capture.
Yep. And I will say your report is correct, this table, and I'm looking at this now, and I think what I have on the screen is prior to a correction that we made in year 5, 10, and 15. So refer to your report for the accurate table now that I'm looking at this. So that's my fault. Then we also looked at holidays, right? So just how many holidays are they offering and which ones? So at the end of the day, in terms of which holidays Elko New Market's offering, I'd say it's very consistent with the market. There's a few, additional ones that some cities offer, but overall pretty consistent. On average, cities, and again, this is just a function of averaging, but the average holidays offered is 12.5, and Elko New Market offers 12. So pretty close there. All right, and then lastly, Michael did mention we took a look at all the insurance type benefits, right? And what's really important to note on these, and we've provided a really detailed matrix to city leadership, but it doesn't sort of fit well up on the screen here. But some key takeaways. First, it's just important to note you can't really set plans side by side and compare them in a super meaningful way because there's just a lot of variables. You have deductibles, you have claims history, you have how much are they paying in terms of the premium versus putting in the HSA. There's a lot of things that sort of factor into some of those. But what we did learn is almost all respondents offered a high deductible health plan, much like Elko New Market, and that many of those that offered that were contributing toward the health savings account each year. You can see the average monthly contributions to the HSA per coverage level here. So those are monthly. So at an employee-only level, you're looking at, I think we said it was something like $1,500 a year was the average. And then on the family side, something like $3,200 a year. Now, again, it's worth mentioning, we do have deductible data, but that matters too, right? Like we have cities that may be contributing more to the HSA because the deductible is significantly higher than what you're offering. And it also factors in how much of the premium for family coverage are they paying. So all those things need to sort of be considered in context. So it's difficult to just sort of show that in black and white, but overall there was a lot of consistency in terms of what you offer employees and approximate coverage levels. And then of all the supplementary insurance plans, dental, vision, short-term disability, long-term disability, all of which Elko New Market offers, I would say you're definitely in the group, if not ahead of the group in some of those supplemental coverages. So. And we will be providing, again, we're still trying to gather up some of the additional data from some of the union agreements and get that summarized related to like on-call pay, callback pay, FTO pay, those types of things. So that's all being gathered and will be provided in a supplemental report that you'll have in time to go into. I know there's some union negotiations opening up, so. Okay, that is what we had to talk about today. So I'd like to open the floor we're here to answer any questions or if you have discussion or want to talk through what your options might look like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, that was helpful.
I'm very fascinated by all of that.
You have
How many
questions?
numbers that you can just like,
You have questions with your curiosity?
no.
Okay.
I have no questions, but I mean, I was looking at Kate and Josh's comments. We're ready to kind of have discussion on.
Yeah, we
Let's-
can jump into that if no one has any questions, so.
Mr. Mayor, when would you want me to relate those comments, Kate and Josh?
Yeah, now would be a good point.
Now's the time.
So unfortunately, neither Commissioner Timmerman or Commissioner Burr, or excuse me, Councilmember Burr, Councilmember Timmerman could be at the meeting tonight. They did provide some comment recognizing that they couldn't participate in the conversation actively. And they asked me to provide this to the council. Councilmember Timmerman indicated, "I am not able to make the meeting this evening, but I wanted you all to know where I stand on the compensation study. I am in favor of the 70%, she's referring to the percentile, implemented over 2 years. I know this seems aggressive, but we as a council stated we want to be above the average. I know that there is no way to do it all in 1 year. Our contingency would be gone and then some. But to spread it over 2 years, I feel is doable, and it would show our employees that we care and stand behind our words. It is a horrible market for any employees right now." I think she's meaning from recruiting employees. "We are here in Elko New Market, have amazing people that work for us, and I would hate to have any of them leave. I'm also in favor of extending decisions to this to our November 16th meeting, but understand that if a decision is made this evening." Councilmember Berg indicated on this topic, "I will be looking to implement no less than option 2. I'm open to considering a 2-year phased approach, but if that would be the direction, then I would argue for somewhere between option 2 and option 3 to offset the delayed implementation. I would also support adding a floating holiday to our benefit package. I am not sure what decision needs to be done related to implementing the grades of positions, so I will listen to the presentation." So maybe that'll be an opportunity. So we still have an outstanding union contract. The union contract and decisions related to that may impact how the council may want to handle non-union employees. So I'd recommend to the council we don't make, final decisions until we've negotiated the contract. However, for purposes of working through the contract, the council needs to indicate preferences related to benefits, because those will be part of the negotiations. So tonight, what the council can do is you can accept the study. You're just accepting the deliverable of the document under the contract. We have ABDO. It's not committing to anything in the study. It's just say, yep, this is the study. It's done for the pieces that they presented tonight, and we're accepting them, and they've completed their obligation as far as that goes. The second part is staff would recommend that because we do have union negotiations starting in the next couple of weeks, before the meeting on the 16th, that the council, to the degree that they can, move the ball on the portions that they can. Obviously, the questions related to the premium pays and those supplemental questions is still outstanding, and city staff still needs to crawl through the rat's nest of a matrix on the insurance stuff to see if there are things that we can pull out related to market position, or if there's questions that the council should, consider as part of that. That would be at the 16th. But items that the council could move the discussion tonight to wherever they feel comfortable would be market position with regards to salary, and and we would ask the council to talk about paid time off as well.
Okay. Go ahead, Gina.
Okay, well, as of right now, I'm in favor of option 2. And I do think that looking at another floating holiday, which I believe was one of Josh's comments, would be a good idea. I do think we need to leave room to, as Tom was saying, to know what happens with like the union negotiations and benefits like healthcare. And then I do think it would be, I favor increasing PTO, especially between the 10 and 20-year range, to be more competitive, and so that's where I'm at right now.
Amanda, you have any thoughts on it?
I don't disagree with anything Gina just shared. I'm at an option 2.5, making up my own numbers at this point. For the floating holiday, do you recall what we did? There was 2 half-days, and then what was the change we made?
So we had a half a day for New Year's Eve and half a day for Christmas Eve, and we combined it into Christmas
Eve off,
Yep,
and then work New Year's.
Work New
Eve.
Year's.
Okay.
One other comment on that, from an administration standpoint, floating holidays are gonna be a pain. And
I
it
liked your
functions
word
essentially the
correction
same
there.
as a paid day off. I would suggest it's well documented, but for labor negotiation purposes, but if the council wants to go towards that direction, I would, in addition to making any adjustments to match the market, throwing just another accrued day on across the board. It has the exact same function as the floating holiday, and it's just easier to administer. But we would want to document that that was done, so if labor comes back later and says, oh, we want that floating holiday, we can say, no, we already did it here.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea too.
I'm firm into option 2 with one additional floating holiday / PTO, whatever we want to call it. That sounds like we're kind of all in some level of agreement, at least in terms of just advancing this and meeting tonight's objective with this study. So, any other discussion on it, or do we need we probably need a motion to accept the study, right?
Yep.
So moved.
So motion by Amanda, an
Second.
emphatic motion. Second by Gina, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
I just
So-
wonder if Josh is like dying to unmute.
I'm sure he is.
So, but he can't.
I know.
So if I can try and repeat what we thought we heard, is that there appears to be a council consensus of at least the 60th percentile within the market, implemented entirely within 2024. Is there any discussion about implementation timeframes?
Yeah, I do like the phased-in approach. I think we need to have a phased-in approach. But I don't know, we're at a point to really exactly dissect that and what that looks like yet.
Okay, so that would be an item we'd want to talk further on the 16th.
Yep.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
The council is in favor of adding a floating holiday or its equivalent to the paid time off pool.
Yes.
And the council's in favor of adjusting the paid time off schedule in years 10 through 20 to more closely reflect the market. Is that fair?
I'm fine with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's quite honestly about as far as you guys can go tonight with the information that you have.
Perfect.
That was highly efficient.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so
Okay,
much.
thank you very
Appreciate
much.
all
Thank
your
you.
work.
And I do just have to say, just kudos to your staff. They've been wonderful to work with and always have a keen eye on things and have been paying really close attention to the details. So that, I think that's why, in collaboration, you've gotten really good information that gives you what you need to make decisions. So,
Well,
you.
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, we have one more item on general business.
So under general business, there was an additional item. The city council is being asked to authorize an expenditure for fire rescue days. The fire rescue days subcommittee has been looking to expand the activities that occur during the event. And one of the things they've been looking at is one of these ninja courses. It's a mini, a scaled-down version of like the TV show where people are jumping and swinging across bars and rings and things like that. And it's set up to be very safe. It's generally oriented towards kids. And they have found a vendor that provides that service. They have 2 trucks. One of the trucks is already scheduled for our date. The other truck is available, but they have multiple inquiries. We're at the front of the line, but for them to be able to lock it in for us, they would need a commitment by the end of the week. Now, fire rescue days, the budget for this year is $5,700, was $5,700. That's just to cover all the current things that the city typically covers. The funding for the Ninja Anywhere vendor would be an additional $3,700. The council did allocate additional money in community events for 2024 in the preliminary budget, but the budget hasn't been approved yet. So we're looking for, if the council wants to make the commitment If at the end of the day, it's not included in the budget, there are sufficient reserves to cover the expense, so you wouldn't have to today decide how you're going to pay for it. That would be dictated, quite honestly, by the decision you make in the budget, on the budget, before the end of the year. But there would be a commitment, and so we would be committing to pay for it one way or the other. The subcommittee is looking for donations to try and cover the cost, but the contract is with the city, which means that ultimately we're responsible for the cost. They're also looking for volunteers. They need 3 volunteers for 5 hours to assist with the operation of the activity. And again, the subcommittee is looking for volunteers, but ultimately the city is responsible for providing them.
Okay. Any thoughts?
I mean, I favor it. It sounds like a lot of fun. However, I do think we should definitely continue to look for volunteers and donations.
I have sort of like a expectation that there needs to be donations being strung, I don't know, by the subcommittee, with the goals that I believe that they have. So I'm on board. Foot in the bill for now.
Yep, me too.
Did get comment from both Kate and Josh on this.
Do they contradict anything we just said?
It absolutely does not.
Okay, let's just move forward.
Shocking.
All right. You don't need any kind of motions of any sort or anything, right?
No, we just need direction. There'll be a contract for it that may need to come back to the council at a future meeting, but we needed to give a verbal
Okay.
by tomorrow, so.
All right, we still got time, so we'll circle back to the public hearing. We'll jump into reports. Anything for administration?
There is not, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Anything to relay from Public Works?
There is not, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Police, chief.
Evening, Mayor and Council. We've had one additional application, and we interviewed one person for the open additional position. The person was interviewed today, and it's gonna be moved to the second round of interviews, which will be on Halloween. Amanda is gonna sit in on that panel, along with Tom, myself, and then another officer, so we're excited about that. I just found out this week I was selected to serve on a national panel for criminal justice information system. In December, I'm gonna be traveling, all the expenses paid by the CJIS Commission to Idaho to sit on a 1.5-day panel and conference about the use of Boise, Idaho,
You go to Idaho for a day and a half?
in December.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
Are you gonna make it? You're gonna have to travel a day or two in advance.
Somehow Idaho does not strike me as being the technology center of the universe, but
Well,
maybe.
I didn't pick
It's not
where it
stereotype.
was. Otherwise, it would have been in Honolulu or
Right.
Orlando at that time. But, so it's a big deal for me. I was nominated and chosen by the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association to be on the board. So it'll be something interesting, and then it'll probably continue on as we go. Southern Valley Lions, still, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I want to remind everybody and anybody listening to go to svamn.org to order our patches that I'm wearing on the uniform. 100% of the proceeds go to domestic violence advocacy programs, so, victims advocacy programs. So very excited about that. It's going great. Thank you to all of you that have been on there and donated. Also bring awareness to our capital campaign. We're hoping to move into a brand new headquarters in Shakopee in December as well. So big capital campaign for that. We just received the Otto Bremer $200,000 grant, but it's a matching grant. So we're trying to raise all the funds we can, because dollar for dollar it's matched by that. So we could double that to $400,000. So other than that, I'm open to any questions. The only comment I'll make about the ATV, reminder for the council that started that ordinance, you did not want ATVs and loud mufflers going on before 6 o'clock, so that's why it was implemented. And the gentleman that was here happens to drive a very loud ATV, and that's part of the reason why he was stopped as well. So that is related to the time thing, and the why the history behind it.
Is the interview a costume wearing Halloween interview? That's my only question.
Certainly welcome. I did not do that to the interviewee.
Tom just side-eyed me like,
I'm just thinking it might be an interesting psychological experiment with the, with the interviewee.
like, I thought this was a Halloween party,
You know me and Tom's history, I do not like outfits during the interview panels, so I like a straight, regular interview, so.
okay.
But you still ask favorite superheroes and stuff, right?
I get to make up my own questions.
That is above my pay grade, and I do not like that, so that is done by somebody else and their
Yeah.
choice, so.
I appreciate your honesty.
Fantastic.
I just want to say congratulations for being nominated for that national event. That's amazing, and we're really fortunate to have you.
I appreciate it, and it is unique that a smaller agency, and it's a national voice for a small agency, and it's the users group, and I'm one of the few chiefs that actually use that information on a daily basis, so
It's really cool.
nice to have my input. Thank you very
Right
much,
on.
Gina, I appreciate that. That's it, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. Engineering.
Introduce Luke Wheeler. He's going to talk to you about municipal state aid system funding. Have you met Luke before? I don't
don't know.
think so.
So, yeah, I'm Luke Wheeler. I'm with Bolton and Mink. Work alongside Rich quite often and along with staff too. So
Sorry to hear that.
it's nice to meet you all. Yeah. It's nothing but a joy. Renee, would you mind sharing that presentation? Oh, sorry. Maybe I should have communicated that.
Mayor, can I ask where he got his coat? I love that coat. Where'd you get that, sir?
That is a good question for my wife.
Email Rich.
Yeah, all right.
Email me, and thank you.
Thank you.
It's customary at this time to present a joke to the,
Oh, boy. Well, I wish I had prepared something.
I'm teasing.
Yeah.
No, you're
I guess I can quickly give you a little bit of background as the presentation's getting pulled up. So, municipal state aid streets, state aid communities. Here we go. We'll just go ahead and do it with the screen here.
Do we want to wait for the other counselors to return?
No.
Oh, my apologies. I didn't realize I
no.
wasn't paying attention.
We'll
I
keep
could-
going.
Go ahead? Okay. So if you want to go ahead and just go to the next slide here, Renee, I'll go ahead and just jump right in here. So, municipal state aid streets, it's a program for cities with populations over 5,000. It's those estimates of population are created by the Met Council. Over 5,000, then you become designated as a state aid community. Elko New Market's estimate for this upcoming year is 5,003, so just made her. So now the city gets to reap the benefits of that threshold. So with that, state aid provides funds sourced from the state gas tax, and the allocation is based on two factors. 50% of it's based off population, the other 50% off roadway traffic. And it's all kind of goes into one pool, and then it's split up proportionally amongst all the state aid communities. So the really big communities with tons of mileage and tons of people get a bigger piece of the pie than, say, smaller community with fewer roads. It's all proportional. And then, so those funds are for roadway construction and maintenance, things to improve safety, mobility, capacity, integration of roadways across communities, stuff like that. So, next slide. So Elko New Market specifically, we've talked with state aid folks quite a bit over the last handful of months. The rough estimate of what Elko New Market's distribution for this year would be around that $200,000 mark. Don't know exactly what that amount's going to be exactly. We'll probably know right around the first of the year, and then those funds come in shortly after that. Once those funds get allocated, then they're split into two different funds: construction and maintenance. So then I'll kind of dive into what exactly that means here, if you want to go to the next slide here. So construction funds, these are used for your construction projects on primarily your most heavily used roadways, and as well as you can use it on cooperative projects with the county and state. So if there's a state-led project, for instance, that the city has a cost share in, you could also use those construction funds for projects such as that. in terms of a local program or a local project where you're trying to use construction state funds, there's a little bit more requirements that go along with that in terms of like the plan production and construction oversight as compared to just a product that uses local funds. Just a little bit more involved. There's a few constraints in terms of requirements for street widths, for instance, or in construction, there's maybe some additional construction testing that you wouldn't typically have to do. It's just required by the state, as well as adhering to wage rate compliance. So, also with those construction dollars, they kind of the program incentivizes you to spend those as you get them, kind of thing. The idea is that a city can actually borrow ahead on those funds. Say a big project's on the horizon, your construction balance isn't quite enough to cover the portion that you want to. You can actually borrow ahead 5 years worth of your allocation. So in other words, if Elko New Market's allocation is $200,000, you could borrow ahead up to $1 million and kind of go in the negative balance. But then it's just kind of, you can always borrow ahead. You just have to submit a request for that, and then that's processed by the state aid folks.
Are the amounts determined on an annual basis, or is it?
Yes, yep. So generally, it's going to be slightly increase generally with inflation, but and then also it'll change on an annual basis based off of, say you add a few miles of roadways, you add a few hundred people, that all plays a factor into it as well. So additional mileage and additional people also gives you a bigger piece of that pie.
Is it safe to assume that if we were to borrow ahead in that scenario, we would have to factor in what it is for that year, because it likely won't go down?
Yeah, so they would take and I would want to look into this further to give you this is my estimate. I think they give you pretty well. They try to forecast that out, give you the closest to what they think is that 5-year running average,
Okay.
and do that amount. So,
Being our population is just over 5,000, what would happen if we drop just below 5,000?
Family of 4 moves out.
Right, hopefully
go ahead,
not,
Tom,
but.
if you wanted to comment on that.
So we asked that question. It hasn't happened very often. I think they only said it's happened once or twice. They had one city that dropped down, and they actually had a notable loss in population. It was like a decade before they got back. They've had other cities that have been right on the line. They indicated that there's a conversation that would be held at the time, knowing that those are still estimates of population. This is my impression in that discussion, is they would not immediately move you out of state aid in 1 year. They would probably see what the best population trend then is after that, because they recognize the impact to the city.
Right.
The other thing I have to point out with borrowing ahead, they indicated it's an option. They indicated it's not something that they do a lot. And they indicated it is dependent on whether or not there's actually dollars available. And they seem to indicate that they would tend to do it more for construction projects than things that would be more like reconditioning projects, was my impression in that discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to get approved for it there, so there has to be a true need. It's not just a matter of, well, we want it now kind of thing. So there has to be a need there. So then moving into, I guess one other note I'll say on that too is by holding on to the dollars too, you're not incentivized to that because those funds don't gain interest. They are what they are. So just something to keep in mind. So if you just hold on to dollars for years and years and years, you're not gaining anything out of it. Your dollar's worth the most in this time. So as well as which it is not common, but if there's a threshold of where you hit the max of what you can have in your account per se, and then you wouldn't get allocated any more dollars if you hadn't spent some money at that point. So unlikely scenario, but something was worth noting. So then the other pot is the maintenance funds. There's a few different options of how the city can determine what goes into this pot compared to the construction funds. There's a $1,500, which is kind of like the default, $1,500 per mile. You have a little over 26 and a half miles in Elko New Market. That equates to about $40,000 that's dumped into maintenance. The other options are you can just do a percentage or lump sum of the allocation. So you could go up to 25% of that $200,000 allocation to put into maintenance funds, equates to about $50,000. And that does not require any additional reporting. You can go up to 35%. There is some additional paperwork and potential for auditing of that, and there's just some additional book work that would have to be done at that point. So it's different for each community and their desires. Generally, staff's recommendation would be doing the percentage-based lump sum and kind of looking at what your maintenance budget looks like for that year, and then allocating based off of what's in the budget.
Luke, is it correct that this is not in addition to the 200,000?
No, this is a portion of the 200,000. So in other words, whatever you take in maintenance funds, the remainder of that 200,000 is your construction. So 200,000 is your total. Thank you for asking for that clarification. But the maintenance for stuff like that this is stuff that can be done throughout the city. Excuse me, sorry, I keep on hitting this. Talk with my hands a little too much. Crack sealing, pothole filling, mill and overlay, stuff like that. That's what this fund's meant for.
We should point out that it was later in the discussions that state staff brought up that we could potentially, and maybe you're going to touch on it.
Yeah, I will, but go ahead. Yep.
We could use that mill and overlays would also qualify for the construction dollars as well. It's one of those few things related to road reconditioning that you can use dollars from either.
And then that would lessen the impact on residents to pay for?
No,
No,
sort of.
sort of, okay. To be, the assessment, I mean, for that.
The city's already paying 60%, so it would reduce that. But-
Okay.
So indirectly, it would have a less impact on property taxes.
It would
Okay,
reduce
yeah.
how much we'd have to borrow, so it would help all residents who are picking up the general cost.
Remains the same.
The
Yep.
assessment would be the
Okay,
same,
thank you for
because that's a
clarifying.
direct benefit.
Okay,
That's very common in all cities.
okay.
We can go to the next slide. So now I'm just gonna kind of talk through, this is the kind of the procedure as we're starting to gear you guys up to become a state aid city. This is kind of the process. So check, first box, 5,000 people, you guys got it. You have a city engineer sitting here, check, done. Okay, next step was fill out that certification of mileage. Staff have worked through that. That's in the hands of the state aid office. Just waiting final approval on that, but that box been checked. I'll elaborate on that here shortly. And then the next thing is, once you get the A-OK that your mileage is good, then you're designating routes that are your state aid routes. And that's where the construction funds and what Tom was alluding to with the mill and overlays on those designated routes, then you could use those construction funds for. And again, I'll jump into that a little bit more here. As well as to note that it's kind of an annual basis where you'll review this and you can make changes to your system. They'll look at your mileage again. If you're adding roadways, adding people, then you're gonna get a bigger piece of that fund. So it's reviewed annually, so. So this first step, that certification of mileage, staff has worked through this at this point. Really what you're doing is you're mapping out the roads in the city, coming up with a total mileage. 20% of that mileage can be designated as a state aid route. So the city has a little over 26.5 miles. That equates to about 5.32 miles that can be designated as state aid routes. So then at that point, we look at the roadways in the city, and we just try to maximize, take that 5.32 miles and use it up as much as we can, because that's how that pie is split up, right? As much of that mileage as we use, that means more dollars coming to the city. So you try to maximize that 5.32 miles while also identifying roads that are potentially in your CIP as roads that, upcoming mill and overlays, for instance, that you want to designate as those routes, because then you can use those dollars on those roadways and those future projects, as well as identifying roadways with highest traffic. That, remember, it was based off traffic and population. So you do traffic counts each year. If you pick the roads with the highest traffic volumes, you'll tend to get more dollars. As well as there's also, which isn't listed here, little caveat is that it all has to be looped, a loop system. You can't just pick a road off over here in the middle of nowhere, then pick this road over here. It all has to be kind of a system flowing together. Either the local roads have to loop back together or intersect with like a county state aid highway, county road, stuff like that. So you'll see that on this next slide. If you want to go ahead and go to the next one. So staff have already taken a stab at this, and this is their recommended routes. Again, allow at 5.32. Look at that. We maximized it. We used every last bit of it here with these routes. So you'll notice that looping factor where everything kind of wraps back to 2 or the county roads, or else internally they're looped together. So this is the recommended route that we went through a few different iterations, and this was the preferred at the staff level.
I note that, 3 of those blocks, well, two of them anyway, are in areas we're proposing to reconstruct next year. Could we use,
Well, we won't have any, let's get to staff's recommendation on how we utilize the dollars.
all right,
I'll
carry
address
on.
that. I have a different recommendation than that.
Oh,
And again, so this may be the map for this year. There's nothing stopping you from next year going and changing, if you really wanted to, changing all these routes. Unlikely, but it's something that you can revise, and just based off of CIP or future projects and whatnot, that you could change this.
unless they.
And I'll get into that here on the next slide, believe it or not. So there we
Calm
go.
down.
He's getting all excited.
I know, you can tell.
I am too.
So that first step, that certification mileage, again, that's gonna get updated every year, just like I talked about, that 20% is recalculated. You might be up to 5.5 miles here if a development were to go, for instance. And then that needs, they're designating those routes, can be reviewed, changed, looking at your CIP, like, oh, this project popped up, maybe it's best to get that designated stated route if we're thinking we wanna use construction funds on that one. So the last bullet there is kind of what Rich was talking about. If you designate a route and then you decide to make that a state aid project and use your state aid funds on it, that route is, I'll call it, locked in for the life of that improvement. So if you were to use it on a mill and overlay, they have it documented that's a 10-year improvement. So you have to have that route on your system for 10 years, otherwise you pay those dollars back. So if you did it on a reconstruction, for instance, the life of that is 25 years. That route's locked in, or otherwise the city's paying back that money they borrowed if they were to try to take that out of their system.
So what that would tell me is you just don't wanna like grab this stray street over here, because that's gonna lock that into your mind.
Right, so if you-
Potentially couple, depending on the improvement, decades,
Yes.
where if you did it on items that are a little more straightforward on the state aid system, where you might be doing more work.
Yes. So say it's a low volume road that you decided to designate and use state aid funds on, well, now you're locked in on that and you're not getting the traffic volumes on it. So that's kind of why it's a twofold, where you're trying to find those busy roads that you're also doing projects on, because even if you were to use those funds, but then you're doing those traffic counts on an annual basis and you're still getting those high traffic counts. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So just kind of putting a bow on this, so just recommendations and kind of next steps here. For council, just kind of indicating support of that system that the staff laid out, the proposed map there of the state aid routes. And also indicating just general support of the theory of kind of maximizing those maintenance dollars to fit with the budgeted maintenance funds. And then so from there, staff would submit these proposed routes to state aid. They have to review them, approve them. They'll go back and forth with staff if there seems to be any issues. Once the city gets approved, they officially designate those routes, and then we would come back to council with a formal resolution, likely in December. That would just officially, you guys signing off on those routes, and then your state aid system is up and running. So at that point, I'm happy to answer any questions or any discussion at all.
Rich, you have anything? You good?
nothing that can't wait to take care of with staff at another time.
Anyone have any questions?
No.
So,
Go ahead.
did you want me to talk about how, at this point, what staff is thinking about for
Sure.
options for use of those dollars? So let's start with the maintenance dollars. So we would be recommending claiming the lump sum at $35,000. It would be within the 25%. That would be our entire street maintenance budget. It would be within the 25%, so there isn't additional reporting and a potentially additional auditing and everything that goes with it. So it's very flexible in how you use those dollars. If we did that, that would basically show up as a revenue in 2024 if we claimed it that way, and that would mean that we would be able to reduce the tax impact in the 2024 budget by 1.5%. So we would recommend that we do that. Somebody might ask the question, Can we claim more than that? I think that would be a little bit difficult if anybody ever asks the question, because if our budget's only $35,000, I don't know how you'd claim 50, if everybody is tracking with that. So that's how we'd recommend that we use our maintenance dollars, because it has a direct tax impact. There's a direct line in with regards to the use of the dollars. I did talk to Corey about, well, knowing that there's an outside funding source, could you use more dollars for road maintenance? You know, because it's been, our road maintenance budget for a lot of years was just, this is what we could afford. And he said for 2024, no. He says at that level of funding, we're getting done what we need to be done. It might change in the future, but for 2024, $35,000 is all he feels he needs for street maintenance, so that's what it would be. With regards to construction, I did want to point out from an accounting standpoint, they don't send us the construction dollars. They're held at the state in basically an account with our name on it, and accumulates over time, and we don't get interest on it. It's just a sitting dollar amount. Unless you get advance on those dollars, you have to wait till it's large enough to a meaningful enough amount for the project that you want. As we indicated in the memo, the current thought process, and this came up late in our discussions with the state, that we might be able to use it for mill and overlay. We knew that we could use maintenance dollars. Coincidentally, a lot of our main routes that make sense to be on the state aid system have a lot of mileage that is included in our capital improvement plan for mill and overlay in 2024 and 2027. We still need, from a staff standpoint, we want to do some analysis to see whether or not it makes sense to change the scope of either of those projects to maximize those state aid dollars. We have not explored with the state the ability to potentially advance funds for the 2024 project. But at a minimum, we may want to push some mileage to 2027 if the streets are in a condition that would actually accommodate it. We don't want to push the streets too far. And that way we would be able to save up, you know, ballpark, if you do the simple math, about $500,000 that we could use towards the city's portion of that project. We may backfill by pulling some stuff from 2027 that could be done today based on its condition. But we will need an opportunity and some time from a staff standpoint over the next several weeks to take a look at that. There is the option to use it in the downtown area. If we're not advancing dollars, there really isn't enough there to have any real impact on the project. If we're able to advance dollars, one of the things we need to look at is when you use state aid dollars, you have to follow state aid standards on that project. And there would be a question of what would that mean for that project where nothing meets standards. So we would need to take a look at that and see if it's feasible to even use state aid dollars on a project in that area. The other concern is what Luke was talking about is if you use those dollars in that location, and we're talking a full street reconstruction, we could be looking at locking in very low volume traffic streets for decades onto the system. And so we want to take a look at what that would mean too. So there's a lot of things, honestly, we still need to take a look at related to this. But tonight what we're really looking for is just feedback from the council. Do you agree with the general system that we've identified at this point?
I mean, I do. Does anybody differ from that?
No, I agree with it, and I like what you said, Tom, about anything we can do to actually lessen the tax impact. So I think it was your first statement about that, so thank you.
I'm
Amanda?
good with it. It makes sense.
Should staff just make that assumption in the working draft of the budget?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything more?
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Appreciate it.
I was just gonna quickly update you. We are in now the measuring phase of our aquifer pump test. We started that on Monday. So we've got 4 days of measurements under our belt, measured through Monday, and then we anticipate to start pumping at that point. Of the 6 private wells that we had, went through quite a bit of legwork to line up for monitoring. 4 of them can't be used. We either can't get into them because of the configuration of the well itself, or the property owner changed their mind because they don't want someone on the site. We do measure them every day in addition to the automated measuring, just to make sure things are working properly and to back up the measurements that we're obtaining. But the DNR advise us to go ahead with the wells we do have, and so that's what we're doing. We may get more direction from them at some point, but at this point, we haven't received anything, so that's where that's at.
How many wells are functioning? Sorry, for the study?
Well, we have, there's like a dozen on the list that we are monitoring, but the 6 private ones that the DNR had asked about, we can only measure at 2 of them. 1 automated and 1 we can only do manual measurements every day.
So there's 9 total wells, 5 of them are city wells that we have, and we have measuring equipment in normally. There's the 2 monitoring wells that we drilled. There's a monitoring well on private property that was installed at some point in the past that we've been given access to be able to do monitoring there. And then there's a private well, I think that's all 9 that are in there, that we're monitoring. So it's not that those 6 wells were the only wells that were being measured. They were supplemental to all of these other wells, in addition to the other wells that we had. So we still have a number of wells that we are still monitoring.
Do we need to find more wells?
Are we still, sorry,
At this point, we don't.
Okay,
We've not been told that.
go ahead.
so we're still within what the DNR was requiring of the pumping test? We have the,
Yep. In fact, the response from them was they expected we wouldn't be able to get into most of them, but they wanted us to try.
Which we
Gotcha.
wished we had known before we ordered equipment, but okay.
oh, there's that, yeah.
I have one other question for you here. Are they on different aquifers, and is there,
Most of these were in shallow quaternary aquifers. That's why the DNR wanted us to try to use them.
okay, and then do we have any, like, written statement or anything from the DNR with their approval of continuing the test without these 6 wells?
I'm not aware of anything in writing. I just trust LRE when they talk to the DNR to advise them of it. But
We've had discussions with the staff at the DNR that are directly working with us on this, and they told us to continue with the process. We are still waiting on something formal in writing.
Okay,
from them.
I just don't want it to come back to us later on or have to extend the study or anything like that.
we don't either.
Right.
We're all on the same page there.
That's it.
Okay, that's it? All right, thanks, Rich. Community development. Okay. There was minutes in the packet for parks. Is there anything additional to be relayed on?
No, we would be looking for an action on the preliminary parks capital outlay budget.
Oh,
So the council recalled that last year, we'd worked through with the parks in developing a capital outlay model, which was taking a look at how do we fund repair and replacement of pieces of equipment and major assets within the existing park system. Historically, it had basically been cash in, cash out. The council just said, this is what we can afford. And then the Parks Commission basically took that and fully allocated that out to meet the most acute needs over the coming 5 years. And there really never had been a more thorough analysis of what the actual need was if we wanted to fully fund the existing park system. So the Parks Commission undertook that last year. They came back with a recommendation to the council that we should increase the capital outlay funding in the budget by $5,000 per year through 2027. And the council did adopt that in last year's budget. We updated it based on some new pricing for projects that we had, and extended that out. And the recommendation to the council was that for 2024, we should $10,000 and then $5,000 a year through 2027, and that would make us good with best estimates. The council did include that in the preliminary budget. In our budget, under capital outlay, we just have a single line item that just says parks, and it's a dollar amount. And every year, there would be kind of like a tentative plan for it. We want to be a little more deliberate and intentional with regards to how we're spending those dollars. So we're basically, the recommendation from the Parks Commission and staff is that we adopt as an appendix to the budget, basically the explanation for the single line item, a 5-year budget based off the outlay model that we use for doing the long-term cash flow analysis. So it is within It reflects the dollars that the council has identified within the preliminary budget. It just provides more detail. The other benefit to that is if we've specifically identified certain expenditures, it allows staff to go do it without having to come back to council, as long as it's within appropriate spending limits identified within the fiscal policies. For example, the expenditures that we had for Woodcrest Park and Boulder Heights Park, once the project was approved, we could have just procured it, because those expenditures were specifically identified within the budget. Because they weren't, we had to come back to council. So it makes things simpler from a procurement standpoint as well.
So what exactly are you asking us to do tonight with this, since we already included this in the budget?
We're just looking for that you agree that a direction, basically indicating that you agree we should include it as part of the budget.
I mean, we certainly can. It's kind of, I don't know, this all becomes a little bit of a game, because then we sit down when it's time to finalize the budget and we start cutting things. So it's easy for us to say, yeah, let's throw all the money we can at parks. I don't know how confident I can be that when we are doing budgets, we're not gonna have to cut certain things. But from an intent and a desire standpoint, I think it's perfectly fine. I don't know, what do you guys think?
I agree. I agree with what you said.
Same,
Yeah.
I just feel like we're gonna get down the road and this is typically one of the first things that gets cut.
Yeah.
I would say we'd handle it like we would in any other portion of the budget.
Right.
We base it on the preliminary. If you guys get into November and December, you've indicated this stuff is coming out, then we would revise, like any other portion of the budget, this portion to reflect the funds that you intend to adopt in the final budget, so
Is that sufficient direction for now?
it is.
Okay. CCEC.
Halloween party is on Saturday from 10 to noon. We need volunteers to come and help set up and be wandering around and helping out throughout the event, and then clean up afterwards. And then you'll be fed lunch. So if you're available, please join us. Is the registration, they can come into City Hall still and pay and get their wristbands, but the mail, they're not gonna get their wristbands mailed?
Yeah, but if somebody I would contact them and let them know that their name will be on a list and we'll still let them in.
Okay,
So, right now, we're looking at, I just hit, like 152 registrations today.
okay. And we typically have a pretty big walk-in crowd too, I think,
Yes.
from what I can recall. That's what I got.
All right. Other committee reports, there hasn't been a scale meeting since our last meeting. Anything for service delivery, or same deal?
One of the topics that did come up during service delivery through other discussions is there was a discussion about whether or not it would pay for the cities and the county to work collaboratively to take a look at the feasibility of rolling the cities into the county's insurance plan and pool. And all the farther it went was a general agreement that it was worth poking at, and currently the county's taking the lead on developing an approach to how we would evaluate that feasibility. And I believe ultimately, once it's determined the scope of work and how we would get there, that they would be looking to come to scale to fund the study to actually take a look at it. So there's nobody saying we should do it. It's more of, hey, we should probably take a look. It might be worth taking a look at to control our insurance costs and stuff over time. And I don't want to say this to alarm anybody, because anytime you talk benefits or touching benefits, people get all weird. This is just taking a look at it. The county and their approach has been able to control their costs very well over the years. They're self-insured. They would just be looking to expand the pool to potentially include the cities. There's a lot of work that have to be done on how that would look at, what it would look like, what options would be available, what would the cost be, what are the barriers to doing it? So very, very, very beginning of the process, but there seemed to be support for that, and eventually come back to scale executive committee to see if that's something we pursue.
You're talking about health insurance, right? I just want to make.
Just
clarify.
health insurance,
Okay.
correct? Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Not general liability or anything like that. It would just be benefits insurance.
Well, usually a bigger risk pool is better, but in theory, but.
All right. Well, Josh isn't here for I-35.
Wouldn't have been a meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So let's circle back to the public hearing.
I don't see anyone in the audience that might be interested. I wonder if, does it look like anybody might be online for that?
No, there's nobody that looks like they might be online. Everybody is, online is here in the meeting.
Okay.
So at this point, the mayor would simply need to open it, call for anybody that'd like to come to the podium and close it.
All right, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing at 7:40. Anyone here to do anything? All right, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing at 7:40. We're not being asked to actually take any other action.
Because of the state aid possibility, we're not asking for approval of the plans and specs or ordering the improvement tonight.
Okay. All right, so discussion by council. Anyone got anything?
No.
Or motions to adjourn or anything?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Amanda.
Second.
Second by Gina, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.